When we think about death in the Old West, we picture gunfights, quick, dramatic, and loud. A standoff at high noon, one shot, and a man drops in the dust. But the truth is far more frustrating. Most people in the frontier didn't die with a bang. They died slowly, silently, and unnecessarily. They died because they drank from the wrong stream, because they didn't wash a knife, because a simple fever had no medicine. They froze inside their own cabins. They bled to death from a cut that should have been bandaged. They died in childbirth because there was no one to help. Not because it was their time, but because no one around them knew better. And the worst part? Many of those deaths were completely avoidable. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have germ theory. But even basic common sense could have saved thousands of lives. Instead, the West became a graveyard of preventable tragedies. In this video, we're counting down 10 of the most common causes of death in the Old West. What killed them, how it happened, and why it didn't have to. These aren't just death stories. They're reminders of how far we've come and how much pain ignorance can cause. Let's take a hard look at how people died in the Old West and why so many of them didn't have to. Top 1. Drinking bad water, dying of thirst. Next to a river. The water looked clean, but it was already killing them. In the Old West, water meant survival. But what most settlers didn't realize was that the same water keeping them alive was quietly killing them. They drank from rivers, creeks, and puddles, whatever they could find. But so did their horses. So did wild animals. And all too often, so did the people up the trail, who relieved themselves in it first. There were no water filters, no boiling, no awareness of bacteria or contamination. If it looked clear, it was considered safe. And that mistake killed thousands. Diseases like cholera, dysentery, and typhoid spread fast through shared water sources. Entire wagon camps would fall sick within days. People thought the sickness came from the air. They didn't realize it was coming from the cup in their own hand. Clean water was rare. Dirty water was everywhere, and thirst didn't give you time to think. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was ignorance, and it turned something as basic as drinking into a deadly gamble. In the Old West, you could die of thirst standing next to a river because you drank what you thought would save you. Top 2. Gunshot wounds. No bulletproof vests, no clean tools, no hope. Surviving the bullet didn't matter if the infection killed you after. Gunfights in the Old West were brutal, but rarely like the movies. There were no dramatic standoffs at high noon, no clean one-on-one duels. Most shootings happened in chaos. Drunken saloons, dark alleys, over a card game, or just plain bad timing. And when the bullet hit, the real nightmare began. There were no bulletproof vests, no medics, no sterile hospitals. If you were lucky, someone dragged you to a barber with a blade and a bottle of whiskey. That was your surgery. Tools weren't cleaned. Wounds weren't disinfected. Stitches were made with dirty thread. Bullet fragments often stayed inside, festering for days. Bleeding was stopped with old cloth, if at all. Many cowboys simply lay on the floor and waited, hoping their body could fight what their doctor couldn't. Even minor wounds became death sentences. Infection spread fast, skin turned black. Fever burned from the inside out. Without antibiotics, there was no saving you. Some begged for amputation, others begged to be put down. In the West, surviving the shot was just the beginning. It was the infection that finished you off. Top 3. Childbirth. One of the riskiest things a woman could do. Giving life in the Old West often meant gambling with your own. In the frontier, childbirth wasn't a private, peaceful moment. It was one of the deadliest experiences a woman could face. There were no hospitals, no trained doctors, and almost never any pain relief. Most births happened at home or in a cabin, assisted only by a neighbor, a relative, or no one at all. Midwives were rare, and many weren't trained. Sanitation was non-existent. Hands weren't washed, tools weren't cleaned, sheets were reused. If labor went wrong, there was nothing to be done. No C-section, no blood transfusion, no antibiotics. A simple complication, like a breech birth, heavy bleeding, or a retained placenta, could kill a woman within hours. Even if the birth went well, infections often followed. Puerperal fever, now easily treated, killed thousands of women back then, silently, painfully, and preventably. And the babies? Many never lived past their first day, or their first week. Stillbirths were common. So were birth defects, complications, and deaths from cold, starvation, or disease. In the Wild West, giving birth wasn't a beginning. It was a risk. And for many women, it was the last thing they ever did. Top 4. Infected cuts. Because nobody thought to wash their hands. You didn't need a bullet to die, just a dirty knife and a little bad luck. Life on the frontier was full of sharp things. Axes, knives, barbed wire, broken wagon wheels, and animal horns. Cowboys got cuts and scrapes almost daily. But what killed them wasn't the injury. It was what happened after. In a world without germ theory, most people didn't think to wash their hands, their tools, or their wounds. Blood was wiped with a shirt sleeve. Knives were rinsed in a bucket. Maybe. Bandages? Old rags, reused dozens of times. What started as a small nick could quickly turn into something deadly. Skin around the wound would swell, redden, then blacken. Pus oozed out. Fevers spiked. Muscles locked. Pain spread to the bone. What we now call sepsis or gangrene was a mystery to them. Some tried to cut the infection out with a blade. Others waited too long and had to choose between amputation or death. There were no antibiotics, no antiseptics, just whiskey, fire, and prayers. In the Old West, you didn't need to fight a duel to end up in a coffin. All it took was a splinter and a dirty hand. Top 5. Food poisoning. Meat plus flies plus no fire equals disaster. They didn't die because the meat was bad. They died because they didn't care. Cooking on the trail was about speed, not safety. Cowboys didn't have refrigerators, sealed containers, or clean kitchens. They had campfires, cast iron pots, and whatever food hadn't spoiled yet. That meant meat that sat out for days, touched by dirty hands, and swarmed by flies. Flies landed on raw meat, then on horse dung, then back on dinner. Spoiled milk, tainted pork, moldy bread, all eaten without a second thought. And many times, not fully cooked. Firewood was limited. Fires didn't always burn hot. So if the meat looked done enough, they ate it. Food poisoning wasn't diagnosed. It was dismissed. A stomachache, vomiting, fever, bad luck, or bad beans. But in truth, it was E. coli, salmonella, or botulism slowly shutting down their organs. The worst part? They didn't connect it. One man would cook for the group with filthy hands, and by morning, 5 were too weak to stand. There were no thermometers, no hygiene, just hunger and trust. And trust, out on the range, could be fatal. In the Old West, what filled your belly one night could kill you by morning. Top 6. Horse accidents, broken necks, and no doctors. One slip, one kick, one fall, and it was over before help could even arrive. Horses were the backbone of cowboy life, but they were also one of its greatest dangers. Every day, men rode fast over uneven trails, rocky hills, and narrow cliffs. Saddles snapped, hooves caught, riders lost control. And when a horse fell, the rider usually hit the ground head first. Broken necks, shattered ribs, crushed skulls, common injuries with no real medical support. There were no helmets, no protective gear, no emergency response. If you fell off your horse and you could stand, you were lucky. If you couldn't, you either died there or got dragged to camp, only to suffer without painkillers, surgery, or hope. Even a horse kick could end a life. A strike to the chest or head could kill instantly, and if it didn't, infection from the wound often did. Doctors were scarce, and the ones who did exist weren't trained for trauma. There were no x-rays, no spinal braces, just crude splints and guesswork. And the worst part? Riding wasn't optional. Cowboys rode every day, in every condition, no matter how tired or injured. In the Wild West, your horse could carry you to town or to your grave. Top 7. Freezing to death. Inside their own cabins. The fire went out, and so did their lives. Winters on the frontier were brutal. Temperatures dropped below zero. Snow buried trails. Wind cut through every crack. And for many settlers, the real danger wasn't out in the woods. It was inside their own homes. Cabins were built fast, often with thin wood and no insulation. Windows rattled, roofs leaked, doors didn't seal. Fires were the only heat source, and once the wood ran out, or the fire died in the night, there was nothing to stop the cold. Many families huddled under blankets. They slept in coats, boots, and hats. Babies were wrapped in whatever was dry, but sometimes it wasn't enough. People froze in their sleep, quietly, slowly. Their fingers stiffened, their breath turned to frost, their hearts simply gave out. And it didn't just happen in the wilderness. Even in towns, fuel was scarce. Storms blocked roads, supplies ran out. No backup, no central heat, just fire or death. The tragedy? Most of it was preventable, if they'd had better shelter, thicker walls, warmer clothes. But in the Old West, even in your own bed, you weren't safe from the cold. Sometimes, the place that was supposed to protect you became your final resting place. Top 8. Snake bites. No anti-venom, no help, just panic. One step in the wrong place, and your body started shutting down. The Old West was crawling with venomous snakes. Rattlesnakes were the most feared, coiled in tall grass, under rocks, near rivers, and even inside boots left out overnight. And the worst part? You often didn't see them until it was too late. A sudden bite, sharp pain, then swelling, then panic. In modern times, anti-venom can reverse the effects. In the 1800s, there was nothing. People tried everything, cutting open the bite, sucking out the venom, burning it with gunpowder, or tying a tourniquet. Most of those cures only made things worse. If the venom was strong, the victim's limb would swell and turn black. Breathing became harder. Speech slurred. Some suffered for hours, others died within minutes. And even if the bite wasn't fatal, infection often was. The wound festered. Fever took hold. Without antibiotics or surgery, many didn't last long. Cowboys, farmers, and settlers lived every day with that risk, especially during hot months when snakes were most active. A single careless step could end everything. In the Old West, your enemies weren't just outlaws and bandits. Sometimes, the deadliest thing in the desert was silent, small, and already under your foot. Top 9. Fire, wood stoves, oil lamps, and one wrong move. You didn't need an enemy to burn your house down, just your own hand. In the Old West, fire was a daily necessity and a constant threat. Families cooked with open flames, heated their cabins with wood stoves, lit their homes with oil lamps, and every one of those conveniences could become a death trap in an instant. Homes were made of dry timber, stuffed with hay, cloth, and paper. One spark, one knocked-over lamp, one ember from the stove, and the whole place could go up in flames in seconds. There were no fire departments, no hoses, no running water, just buckets, if they even had time to use them. And once a fire started, especially in a dry prairie wind, it didn't stop. People burned alive in their own cabins, children caught in upstairs lofts. Entire frontier towns were lost because someone left a candle burning. The fire didn't discriminate, young or old, awake or asleep. And if you survived the flames, you still had to deal with smoke inhalation, burns, infections, and total loss of everything you owned. In the Old West, fire kept you alive. But if you got too comfortable, it took everything, including your life. Top 10. Murder. Because justice was late or never came. You could be killed over a card game, and no one would ever pay for it. The Old West wasn't just dangerous because of snakes, disease, or weather. Sometimes, the most deadly threat was the person standing next to you. Murder was shockingly common, and justice was painfully rare. There were few sheriffs, fewer marshals, and almost no real law enforcement in remote towns or along the frontier. If someone shot you in a saloon, they could ride out of town before anyone asked questions. Even if they stayed, chances were good they'd never be tried, let alone convicted. Arguments over land, cattle, cheating, or pride turned violent in seconds. Guns were tools, but also tempers. And when duels happened, they weren't fair or formal. They were fast, emotional, and often one-sided. Even lawmen weren't immune. Some were drunk, corrupt, or outgunned. Others were targeted just for wearing the badge. In some towns, vigilante justice took over. Lynchings, mob hangings, quick trials with no defense. It was justice by anger, not by law. The most chilling part? Many killers weren't hardened criminals. They were neighbors, cowboys, or strangers just passing through. In the Old West, death didn't always wear a black hat. Sometimes it smiled, then pulled the trigger. Top 10. Murder. Because justice was late or never came. You could be killed over a card game, and no one would ever pay for it. The Old West wasn't just dangerous because of snakes, disease, or weather. Sometimes the most deadly threat was the person standing next to you. Murder was shockingly common, and justice was painfully rare. There were few sheriffs, fewer marshals, and almost no real law enforcement in remote towns or along the frontier. If someone shot you in a saloon, they could ride out of town before anyone asked questions. Even if they stayed, chances were good they'd never be tried, let alone convicted. Arguments over land, cattle, cheating, or pride turned violent in seconds. Guns were tools, but also tempers. And when duels happened, they weren't fair or formal. They were fast, emotional, and often one-sided. Even lawmen weren't immune. Some were drunk, corrupt, or outgunned. Others were targeted just for wearing the badge. In some towns, vigilante justice took over. Lynchings, mob hangings, quick trials with no defense. It was justice by anger, not by law. The most chilling part? Many killers weren't hardened criminals. They were neighbors, cowboys, or strangers just passing through. In the Old West, death didn't always wear a black hat. Sometimes it smiled, then pulled the trigger.